Hey everybody, welcome to RPC Working Group Call 0. I have posted the agenda in Discord. I will repost it here in the local chat for folks to take a look at. Does anyone have any last minute addendums to the agenda they'd like to get on the list before we get started? Okay. All right, sounds good. So taking it from the top here. Hi everybody. Happy Monday. Does anybody have anything interesting to report on their client passing of the RPC compatibility test suite? For instance, Besu has been looking into getting this running correctly. We found that right off the rip, we're not starting up because we have older system contract addresses in our I forget exactly where that's configured in the test workflow, but that's our problem at the moment. So we're going to be fixing that. Does anybody else have anything? I think the ask is, are you passing these RPC compat tests? Are you looking at whether or not you're passing the RPC compat tests? Are they useful, et cetera, et cetera? Because moving forward with these discussions in this initiative, I think that's probably going to be our, our most important indicator of compliance.
Yeah, I think Geth filled most of these tests, so by proxy we end up passing a lot of them. I'm interested to see as more clients come online and really look at the tests. There is going to be some deviations, and it doesn't always mean that the client's response is incorrect. I think RPC compat is just very strict because it would be nice to live in a world where you can swap your clients in and out and you don't really notice that there's a difference between the clients. And that was kind of like this vision for being very strict about the compatibility across clients. So like everything down to like the exact number of fields, the exact ordering of fields in the RPC request are verified. This is not like necessarily JSON spec because JSON doesn't care about the ordering in an object. And like we could look at reducing the strictness of these checks if it ends up making sense. But yeah, so for us, we're passing pretty much all of them. I think there's one issue on the access lists that we've made a change that's caused the order to change in the output, and yeah, we can fix that.
Yeah, actually, I looked into this. So there's some non-determinism in the response, and this is kind of what causes it to break because on some runs, we also generated them in the opposite order, basically, because of the hash table iteration order, which is random and Go.
I think this is going to be very relevant when we get on to our next subject for error codes. I think that's what Light Client is hitting on as one of the cruxes of our problem. So thanks for that, Light Client. Anybody else?
Yeah, there's one thing I noticed, like in the access list, indeed the order matters.
Joachim, you're super, super low. I can't hear you, bud.
Oh. Okay, well, 1 second.
Oh, that's a little better.
Is this better? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Like indeed in the access list test, the order indeed matters in the test because if you swap two items around, then the test fails. But I was wondering, is this actually part of the official spec? Like, I don't remember that the access list should be ordered, like the storage slots should be ordered.
I mean, it's not a part of the spec, but obviously for us, it's kind of like the testing framework. It can only approximate the correctness in a way. And for us, we think it's a trade-off that basically we can all just agree to order them by the address in the output, and then it will be possible to test it in our approach. But we cannot make custom test verification for every method, or at least that's not really wanted.
Yes, that's true, but I'm talking about the storage keys in this this case, and that is actually an array.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So basically,
Okay.
the way the tests work is they just compare literally to the output.
Yes.
And so there is now, I've added a tiny modification there where specifically for numbers, you can have them like with or without the decimal point. But I think in general, the idea is that we want to agree on the outputs, even if it means having to, for example, sort it in the clients or something. And it's definitely possible to come up with the correct output there. Otherwise, if we didn't have it, then in the test we would have to basically, I don't know, sort the results inside of the test and then compare or something. But it would be like a custom logic that only applies to this method.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, but in general, I would agree that we should make like these outputs like very strict. So indeed, if we agree, like just make these storage keys increasing or something like that, that would be good. Yeah, cool.
All right, thank you. Anybody else want to comment on what their client's current status is with regard to the RPC compatibility test? I know we got some folks joining us a little bit late. That is the current topic of discussion. Okay. Cool. All right. Shall we move on to error codes? I think so. To elaborate a little bit more on what Light Client was saying earlier today, I dug into error codes. They're not specified for starters, and when they're enforced, for instance, if you take a look at an ETH call test that's in the execution API test in the RPC compat tests. If you look at an ETH call and it fails, it asserts on the error code and the error message, for instance, right? So that, well, correct me if I'm wrong. I see the error message is in the expected response, whether or not
No, but
that's
the error
being.
message is excluded from the comparison. So
Thank you, Felix.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was hoping for. So then the issue that kind of remains there is like, all right, great. If we're going to enforce error code compliance with the existing tests, and it sounds like we are, we just need to add more tests that cover those error code cases. But we also need to document what those codes are, what they mean, and include a YAML schema for them. So they're actually presented in the RPCs. Right now, if you open up an RPC in the documentation and look at its request and response, it's always a happy path. So who has thoughts on, a general error handling section for the spec? Where should it be? Do we need to build an error YAML schema for inclusion? What are people's thoughts on that? Felix?
So the test that I want to clarify, so there is only one error code assertion in the test, and it's for this specific case. So we don't have a general mechanism for error codes. It's only for this. And I added this specific error code because it's basically one of the very few cases where we actually need it. So for example, we don't really care if the server raises like one error code or another error code, for example, for the invalid parameters. It's just, technically we could define it, but these are also kind of covered by the JSON RPC standard. But for the ETH call, we have the specific case where the contract reverted, and it's not actually the users, they want to have a feedback in this case in order to, for example, be able to parse the revert reason. And this is why I proposed quite a while ago to add this error code 3 to cover this. And it's actually also something that I brought up on the all core devs before, but then basically we just deferred the decision because we didn't have enough decision power that day or whatever to figure it out. But this is pretty much like for example, in MetaMask, it also returns this error code and so on. So and it's in some of the client libraries. And so I think it's pretty obvious that if we can agree on this one error code, it's a good start. And then there's an open pull request for adding it into the spec as well. So I just added the test sort of like proactively, I guess, because it's the default behavior, and at least in Geth, to return this error code for this specific case.
Okay, so does anybody have thoughts about, kind of not formalizing error codes via YAML schemas in the spec and leaving it up to individual tests?
I think maybe the first thing we should do is actually well, make the spec, because the spec is, I think, not complete. Like in last call, we also mentioned like things like, for instance, for the block, like I think Nevermind has the all-for field, and the spec has a minor field or a Coinbase field. I don't remember, but maybe that's actually a first start before we can actually discuss expanding the tests. Sorry, the spec.
Okay. Any other opinions, thoughts on the matter? I'm not quite hearing a hard decision on error handling yet.
So I do think that in general, yes, you're right, we should add it to the spec, but it's not really, we don't actually have a lot of defined error cases. That's what I mentioned before. So there's only like a handful probably that we can come up with that makes sense to even specify, because most things are actually covered by the JSON RPC spec itself. So for example, if you call an invalid method, then there's a standardized error code for it. And we're not going to test that in the RPC compat. We could, but it's not really something that is in the realm of that. So it's only about these like Ethereum specific error cases, and there really aren't a lot.
Okay, so maybe we don't need a general error handling section of the spec. Sounds like that's kind of what we're advocating, but we do need the capacity to optionally more strictly specify errors within each RPC call.
Yeah, so it's possible with OpenRPC. So it's definitely something you can add this. Like it has a facility for adding these error codes. And I did it for this one case for ETH call with the revert. And then like in my pull request, I'm basically trying to, let me just try to find it.
Awesome.
It's something that was basically added. But wait. Yeah, so it's in here. So this thing, I pasted it into the chat.
Thank you, Felix.
So you can see it
So
there.
I think,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So there is the thing that you can define error codes and you can find the error data. And I think the handling of error data is like the thing that is also interesting for the error handling, because for this case where we want to capture the EVM revert, the goal here is basically to define it in the spec that the client is supposed to return the raw EVM output, which like the EVM revert data. Because at the moment, like specifically for ETH call, the definition of ETH call from the beginning was just that you do call and you get back a hex string that is the return data of the EVM. But for revert, you actually don't need, because it's an error in the JSON RPC, you don't get a result. Like in JSON RPC, you can either get a return value or you can get an error. But in this error, we also need to give kind of the return data, because it's actually not the return data, it's like the revert error data from the EVM. And we need this because on the client side, you want to be able to then parse it according to, for example, the contract ABI to figure out which event is it and so on. And the client, Ethereum client, it doesn't actually know usually the contract ABI which is being called, but the Ethereum node that's running ETH call doesn't really know the ABI, but on the RPC client side, they will know the contract ABI that they're interacting with, so they are in the position to decode it. And that's why we need to add this raw data into the output.
Okay. Okay, cool. This is awesome. Okay, so let's all take a look at the PR that he posted, and I think that's a great, first pass. I think I shouldn't say first pass, but I think that's a good approach that we all seem to be happy with for error handling. Should we, Felix? You said before there's maybe like a handful of other places where we actually do care about the error code like this. Perhaps we should collect those, open an issue here, and once this PR is approved and merged in, cite it as our way for implementing the other ones.
Yeah, there were a couple people who raised their hand, so I don't want to interrupt anyone.
Okay. You're Kibbalin. Go ahead.
Hello. So, not sure if this related, but I've been trying to standardize our Nethermind clients' JSON RPC errors, error messages to adjust it to guess error messages, and I um I noticed that guess has some weird error messages. I send it to chat. So for example, for ETH call and ETH simulate v1, it has some format of applying some suffix and prefix like error and gas supplied gas, and for example for ETH estimate gas, it has different, but the meaning is similar. So can guess devs remove this formatting at all, or I don't know, to make it one format? I haven't checked all the other APIs, so maybe there are more some other formats of formatting errors, and also these errors are only for transaction errors. The errors from VM, they are not formatted, like revert, for example, that we were discussing before.
So this is a very interesting question, but why? I mean, first of all, why should you standardize? I mean, I agree that maybe our error text could be better, but why should the error text be standardized? For example, like I don't really fully understand it. Is it required, or is there? I mean, there should never be a need to standardize the error text.
Because so I've been working on testing tools like execution spec tests and one more, I don't remember the name, but there are lots of multiple clients, multiple clients that gives T10 tool that generates error. So they all have different error error messages, and I was collecting all of them and like writing, and I thought it might be nice to have standard errors for each case, and yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so I definitely agree that like the errors could be better, but we don't really want to. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of part of the problem, like what FOC also mentioned there in the chat. This is like a huge issue. We don't really want to be like the gold standard for error messages, especially in Geth, and this is also why I removed for the RPC compat test, why I removed the error messages from the comparison, because there's no expectancy that the error message should contain like any information. If there is some machine readable information, it should be contained in error data. And for the for ETH simulate v1, it's actually very completely specified. So I think including some error code. So simulate v1 is probably the best specified ETH RPC endpoint we ever had, because it even had its own spec process and so on, and its own series of calls. So I think it might make sense to, like, if there's any need to look at these error messages in simulate v1, it seems kind of weird to me, like, because we could just change it. It's so well defined already.
Merrick, you had your hand up. You still have something you want to comment on?
Not really, because I think Felix covered what I wanted to say. So we should adjust, in my opinion, we should adjust and standardize error codes, but not necessarily error messages. And we should, whenever we see such situation when some library uses error message, we should ask to support error codes, because we had many situations, probably many minority clients as well, that someone reached out to us that, hey, you returned something different than what we expected, and it broke our library or whatever, right? So I think this is known story for Bezu, for Erigon, and other minority clients.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to take an action item to let's aggregate what the blast radius of that is. Like, what are these tools and libraries that we think might actually be looking at error messages, and start the communication process out to those teams in order to focus on error codes and not messages.
Yeah, so just a quick addition. I think from this, if call and if estimate gas are the most common points of complaint in terms of error messages. But probably something obvious.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
so
sorry, can
they
you
have
repeat that?
definitely
ETH
have the
estimate
most.
gas, and what was the other one?
If call.
Right.
And by extension, it will hit us with if simulate, right?
Yeah.
So I think eStimulate is kind of, I think it actually does have some defined error conditions, but like for example, for estimate gas or for send transaction, things like that, they actually have some error conditions. The other things, not so much. Because the only real condition could be something like it in most of the RPCs, they are just basically database accesses. And in all database accesses, we have this convention in the API to return null if the item is not found. And this is, so it's not an error actually. Like if you try to access, for example, a block which doesn't exist, then you will get the null response. This is like another area where in the future we could actually extend it. But for example, in some cases, it's kind of useful to be able to return an error. But in general, when the client returns a non-error response, it is pretty sure that, for example, the block that was requested doesn't exist or something. And if there's actually like an error in accessing the database, for example, a disk error or something, then it will return an error response instead of null. So these are the most important cases. And we do have tests covering this like not found case with returning null. But then for ETH call and so on, because they are more interactive and also estimate gas, they have maybe some more error conditions. For example, if you try to send a transaction type that is not supported, for example, that could be an error condition that we define. Or if, like for ETH call, yeah, well, I mean, if you run out of gas, for example, then at the moment it just tells you that it was out of gas, but there's actually no error code for that. And then, so that's something that we could add. And then for sending transactions, there are some cases, like for example, if the fees are not do not cover what's required by the node, then we could probably also define error codes for that. Like if you try to submit a transaction, but it's too cheap for the node, and you would have to submit it with a higher fee, at the moment you will get a text error. And then this is a case where we would again need an error code for the client to know that it failed because of the fees. And at the moment they can only get this from the text.
Okay. Trying to think of how to collect that into an action item. It seems like we need to open an issue to outline which RPC calls. How would you phrase that, Felix?
What do you mean? The action item? Well, we need to make a list of the like error situations, I guess.
Yeah.
And I mean, I listed some now, but definitely this is something that we wanted for a long time, just to have this basically like this basic list. It doesn't have to be complete even. It's just something that at the moment is literally like completely undefined. The client just returns like a generic error and some text, like for all of these cases.
Okay,
From
Merrick?
my understanding, there is an error mapper. You can correct me if I'm wrong because you explored that in T8N tool, and this sounds like a good starting point to check the list of error messages and how different clients map to different responses. So I think T8N tried to handle it somehow, and maybe from this from taking a look at those mappers, we can try to discuss what should be the correct response message. Jürgen?
Also, the benefit of having all one error for all the cases that, for example, in state tests and blockchain tests that are generated by execution spec tests, there is a field in the post state that expect exception, and this exception text is in the format of Python project that is not in format of any other client. And for now, I checked in our client that we do not check for exception message. Like we don't check this field, and we only check for the state root match. And I believe that all the other clients does not check this field expected exception. So in the future, if we have the same errors for all the clients, then we can regenerate all the test cases, and it will be checking the tests more strictly, because transaction might be rejected by different cases, but it will not be checked for now. Like, yes.
So
That's it.
I think to Felix's point though, I think error codes plus the data leads us to a sub error code that maybe we would want to formalize.
What do you mean?
Does that give you the precision, Yerki, that you're looking for? Because we kind of want to avoid asserting on the message itself, because it could be free text, and in the case of like kind of generic errors, you might have to describe a situation that is unique to your client, right? So I think I think we're starting to want to avoid asserting on messages in any case. But Felix, did I paraphrase that correctly?
Yeah, well, I mean, I kind of wanted to respond also. So, I mean, with this T8N stuff, it's like, it's not really something that I think can be specified. I don't know. It's not really super related to the. One second. Yeah. So the T8N cases, they are not really related too much to the APIs, because in the API we actually don't have a lot of these situations. Like ETH call, for example, is not the same as adding a transaction in a block or something. So it's hard to say if these error cases will truly be the matching ones. I do think that it's useful to be able to define these error conditions also for T8N, but we have also seen, maybe as a counterexample, we have seen it in the engine API tests that like being too strict about how all of the errors should be handled just leads to this like hellish situation where we have to basically match the behavior of the spec like to the letter in the client, and it's very, very annoying to do for very little benefit. So for example, in the engine API, which is sort of the poster child of RPC specification, because everything is specified in the engine API, every little error situation has its own assigned error code, and you have to absolutely follow them. And it has a kind of complex error handling model. And we have seen it before that it's basically very annoying to implement this correctly. And for example, Geth also still failing some obscure tests with withdrawals, for example, because we're not performing all the checks exactly in the correct order and so on. And I wouldn't really want to have that in the user APIs, like this situation where you have to make sure you absolutely check everything the same way everyone else does it as well. It's more like we should be agreeing on some common cases and define codes for them, but not try to be maximally prescriptive about every error situation, because then that leaves no freedom for the implementation at all.
Love it. Thank you. Okay, does anybody have anything else they'd like to discuss with regard to error codes or error handling? All right, I got a bonanza to-do list items in my notes for this, so I will collect that and ship it out later. Who's ready to move on to data fields? Awesome. I knew you would be. All right. So I think this is a kind of similar situation, right? Where we're looking to collect misalignments across clients, likely via test. I would imagine these would arise via test failures or maybe caveats in tests. Is Y parity the most glaring example of this? Where we rename V to Y parity, but then we also accept V in some cases, but not others. How would folks go about collecting the list of data fields that are underspecified via test failures?
We can just look at the test, I think, right now. So there's this thing, there's like 3 or 4 different things there, and that's kind of it. So we have this Y parity thing that is mostly fixed, I think. And we have these, like what was mentioned before with Nethermind with the block author. And we have some other stuff, like for example, in Reth, they added this proposal for this, I think it's called this like log index in block or whatever it was. It's an additional field that they return for logs. And so these are basically the case. I think I'm not actually sure about Aragon because the tests don't work, but probably like knowing Aragon, they also have something like this. And I think it's just like this handful of cases, and we have to make a decision. Should we like drop these things again, like from the clients, or should we, and this was my original proposal in the document, just enshrine the current behavior and just define it as canonical, whatever it is. Like if we can't agree on removing some stuff because of backwards compatibility issues, we could also just basically make everyone implement whatever is the current set of fields, because I think it's more important to agree on the fields than it is to try and be sort of like minimal. Like we really just want to reach a state where the specification and the clients agree.
So I have a very, very, very weak preference, and it's purely aesthetic for going back and standardizing things. But I honestly don't see a ton of benefit in that, and I think it's just as good as just enshrining past behavior and then trying to correct it moving forward. Like if it's a historical wart on the specs, I kind of don't care. But you know, it's a wart. Does anyone else have an opinion, or is it kind of just we don't care, make it go away?
Yeah, I mean, we still have to agree on these specific cases then, so we should maybe talk about them. So we have this author field. I saw it earlier here in the chat that I think Marek mentioned that Nethermind is considering to remove author in block in favor of basically just returning minor, which is the name that is in the specification as well. So that would be one thing.
Give me some time and us some time, and we will come back to that. I think it's likely that this field is not used anymore, but you know, we need to confirm it.
Okay, so I will just check the test right now and see what else is there. Oh, damn it. Yeah, I can't actually, with BSO, it's still not, I think maybe in the DevNet 5. Now it's hurting me big time that I added the proc tests into it because I can't really check like for most of the clients. Yeah, okay, so BSO doesn't really want to load the chain in the test, so I can't really check for it. But for Nethermind, I can see that, well, mostly we have... yeah, so there's also this thing with the gas price. So this is something else. So when in... This is, I think, just a bug. So basically in Nethermind, it appears that it's not returning the gas price for blob transactions, like the effective gas price is not returned. The V is not returned because it's legacy, I guess. And then for a legacy transaction, it doesn't return a chain ID. And I think this is just an artifact of the implementation. So in Geth, the way we do it is basically we have a single kind of output routine for transactions. And then the way it works when we perform a transaction related operation, we will basically parse the transaction into this kind of like output format. And this means the output format is the same for all transactions, except for some stuff. For example, if for blob transactions, we return some additional fields because they are, they have the blobs and so on. But the basic fields are the same for all transactions. And I think in Nethermind, obviously checking the test, it's very different. It has a custom output routine for every single transaction type. And this means it can lead to the situation where for one transaction type, the fields are different from another one. And it kind of mirrors a bit how it's done in the spec. But honestly, I think the way the spec is written right now is very annoying. Like the way it does it is it defines in the open RPC, we have an output object for each transaction type, and it's basically a union. So the outputs for each transaction type could be very, very different if we wanted to. Like if we added a new transaction type 5 right now, it could have like basically completely different fields from the other transactions. But I think this is not really a very intuitive way to do things, because most transactions actually have, like basically all transactions have an effective gas price, because that's how they are executed by the Ethereum EVM. And so obviously you do want that gas price in the output. And it's kind of the same with some of the other things. So it's hard to say like what's a better approach, but I think that, for example, specifically for Nethermind, it has this issue that basically because of the way it's implemented, some of the transactions return different info from other ones.
Do you know if this is Nethermind only, or like other clients might respond?
I mean, I just said Nethermind because these are the tests that I have open right now.
Okay.
I can check. Oh, actually, I see that Aragon. No, oh wow, Aragon actually managed to run it. Someone actually fixed the Aragon test chain loader, so we can actually check it. It has very few differences. I see. Yeah, okay. So it actually has mostly. Yeah, okay. That makes sense. So Aragon has no differences as far as I can see. Yeah. So Aragon is completely aligned with the RPC test, except for some special cases when it comes to invalid input and so on. And then maybe Reth we can also check. Yeah, Reth has quite a few differences. So they have, in the transactions, they have, ooh, interesting. They, okay, so I think Reth at the moment is a bit broken. Like looking at the test results in DevNet 5, it's kind of broken. But looking outside of the DevNet 5, I think we can see that. Yeah, I mean, basically, the only thing is they don't actually have this transaction issue. So for Reth, they agree with the transaction output format in the test. So for them, it's only about the receipt. And for Nethermind, it has, let me check if it has some differences in the receipt.
So this is curious, Felix. How did you so quickly determine that Aragon is the closest aligned to the spec? And
so
can other clients use that process?
So the way I did that is literally I went to the DevNet 5 Hive instance.
Yep. Yep.
And then just open the test suite, the latest one with Aragon. So I posted the link, and then I see that it only fails a couple tests, basically. And I know these tests like what they are, like I know the intention behind the test. So I know that, for example, if it says this like not found, then it's supposed to, like, for example, here you can see in this, if you click my link, you can see that there's this failing test, ETH get block receipts not found. And I can see that, for example, in Aragon, for some reason, they implemented ETH get block receipts differently from all the other clients because they don't return null for not found, but they return an error. And that's incorrect. Like they're supposed to return null.
Okay, so there's no
So
easy
stuff like that.
category of error. There's no easy category of error that we could use to help teams triage these cases.
No, it's kind of on them, but I do think that Aragon,
Yeah.
seeing it now that basically they are able to actually run the test, they weren't really able. They had like basically everything failing before because it just didn't load the chain. So there was a bug fix in Aragon that makes it load the chain. So now we can actually see the result, and it seems they are very close actually.
Yeah,
It's
bases in
just
that
that-
situation as
yeah.
well.
So the thing is that I'm right now just quickly checking. So mostly what I'm seeing is that with Nethermind, we have this thing with the fields. So Nethermind has this transaction fields issue because the fields are different for each transaction type. So that's something that Nethermind you could fix, I guess. But it's basically just make sure that the same fields are returned for all transactions, like the same basic fields. And this means you, for example, will return the chain ID even for the legacy transaction, and you return the gas price even for the blob transaction, and so on. So all of these basically need to be, but I actually see the gas price generally, it also not returned for the new set code transaction from 7702. So it's just an inconsistency basically in the implementation. You just forgot to add it at some point. And this is, so I guess it's pretty easy to add that, and then it will also pass. And now I'm also checking a bit for the receipts, but it seems that actually for the receipts we do align with, like Nethermind has no errors in the receipts output. So it's only Wrath who has that error.
Okay, we got about 15 minutes left. I think this was really good to drill down into the data stuff. I think the TLDR might be get your tests running and compare them to the other clients to figure out where these field inconsistencies might be. We will take a look at the tests to make sure any client-specific assertions get surfaced and discussed across teams. Does that sound fair? And we think there's only a handful of those.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So moving on, you know what? I'm going to actually, there's a note on the agenda to discuss ETH fill transaction and ETH send transaction, but we only have 15 minutes left. Do we want to open it? I guess let's ask folks, do you want to do an open discussion on PRs that are going into the execution specs and discuss those? Or do you want to dive into using fill transaction and deprecating send transaction as a vertical spike towards a new, slightly improved RPC design process? Option one, option two.
I mean, I'm not sure if it's going to be very productive to look into the PRs.
Okay. Okay. So last meeting, we discussed ETH fill transaction. And I believe we were saying that this was already present on Geth, but it hadn't made it into the specs. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. There's a PR, but it's not added.
Okay. And the intent would be, hey, we could actually deprecate ETH send transaction, since send transaction is super dependent on clients being configured with keys and kind of operating on the wallet, et cetera, et cetera. So we want to deprecate send transaction and push people towards ETH fill transaction. How does our process today accomplish that? Is it sufficient? And do we need to make any adjustments around the process if not?
Sorry, can you come again? What do you mean with the process?
When I mean the process, I mean, user proposes an issue, PR into the spec, we look at it, we, pull it in, how well defined is that process and is it sufficient? This is an example improvement to an RPC that we want to get better at doing and faster. Are there things that are missing in our current specs, like error codes, that need to be revisited or need to be, I guess, evaluated when somebody submits a new RPC for consideration?
I don't know. I mean, I do think that it's not sufficient right now because it has kind of failed for us, this process. I mean, we have raised this PR a while ago, like my colleague did it, and it wasn't really, we just weren't sure ourselves, like what's the next step. I mean, we have implemented this. We know that like it's a suitable thing that can be working. We've tested it for a long time, and so definitely it's something that, I mean, the thing works, but the question is just then like, where do we bring it up? So this is kind of where the process currently fails right now. I mean, now we have this call, so obviously we could discuss it on here, but in the past we weren't really sure, like, should we bring it up on all core devs? When we did bring up RPC stuff on all core devs, the reception wasn't great. People didn't really respond to it in a way. Basically everyone was just like, yeah, I don't care. And if not a lot of people care, then for example in ACD, then Tim will not really make a decision. It's not like you can't just force a decision on ACD by not having anyone respond. Like, people have to at least have some kind of response. And it never really occurred because it's kind of a weird forum to make these decisions in. That's the thing. So I guess then the other option would be to raise an interface category EIP, and this is something that has been done before as well. But then it's kind of, you're basically doing that would open the floor to then having like a specification proposal with the rationale that can be widely circulated. You can have a forum like Magicians or ETH Research where you discuss the proposal and so on. Like, that's something that could be done. But in this particular case, we actually haven't done that. So that's something we could do, and maybe it would lead to more like this gaining more traction. At the same time, it is very hard to explain the use case for some of these things. So for example, if we just generally propose to say, let's remove ETH send transaction, very few people will maybe understand what we really mean. Or so I think it's kind of hard to find an audience for this discussion as well. I mean, you guys now understand it very well because you're on here, but it's just like something that you have to see, that this is not something that is so easy to find anyone to actually discuss with.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is maybe it's not so much of a process problem as it is a coordination and investment in the existing process problem. I.e., we're looking for process plus plus, not new process.
I mean, we definitely want to have a process, and at the moment this call is like the closest we've ever been to having like a process where people gather who actually care about the RPC. Like, this is the main failing has just been there isn't like this forum where we can discuss these things. And even in this particular call, we don't have all the stakeholders here. Like, we would need a significant representation from one or more wallets actually here in order to understand that. Or we would need a representation from, for example, the RPC providers. And then they would have to be able to give their input. Like, you need a call like that, because people need to, all of these people are involved with this API and it affects them very much. I mean, I think it would be great if, for example, I don't know, Infura or QuickNote or whatever, they would add this kind of fill transaction endpoint and say, if you need to send a transaction, you can get your defaults like with this. You're still supposed to check it on your side. And I'm pretty sure they do implement it, actually. It's just that we don't really have them on here.
Fossil, you want to go? Oh, you're back on mute. Okay.
So I'm actually trying to see, it seems that Infura has been merged with MetaMask.
I'm in contact with Infura folks. I've made them aware of this call, and I'm encouraging their participation as much as possible.
No, mostly what I'm seeing is like I tried to click through the documentation on the site, on the Infura site, and it lands me now in the MetaMask documentation.
Could you send me that link? Because that's not good.
I mean, that's not really. I mean, if you go to infura.io and you click access docs, you will end up in the MetaMask docs, because now Infura and MetaMask are the same, as far as I understand. Like they are literally the same.
Okay.
So it's kind of like, yeah, okay. So I mean, so they don't have it anyway. I checked it, but then there's, I don't know, like we can check. I don't know. Yeah, QuickNote might actually be an example. They probably also have this documentation, right? Yeah, they do. Yes.
Okay, so Fossil has appeared in the chat, apparently having microphone problems. Sorry to hear that. Saying, wants to propose to collect some metrics and share them with the community and implement in more clients. I like this method as a call than previous approach, and it preserves privacy more. Yeah, this is a good point. Like, how do we know what our users are doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't, but you can definitely. I mean, I think in the case of fill transaction, it's mostly just that we don't want to support send transaction in the nodes. So this is where, I mean, the wallets do support send transaction, and they do it because obviously for them, I mean, it's the main entry point. Like they want to definitely capture the app intent to send a transaction. So they want to keep supporting it. It's just that the nodes shouldn't be supporting it. And these send transaction can be implemented in terms of fill transaction and send raw transaction. It's kind of the same. It's just this process broken out in 2 steps. So this maybe opens up this, like, if we were to just introduce fill transaction in the nodes and say, you know, we're not going to support send transaction anymore, I think the world would be fine. Like people would adapt. Hardly anyone uses their node to call ETH send transaction. I mean, I know a couple people who maybe do it, but it's not really a realistic option today. So we could just make that choice in this call. But then it's a question, what happens with the spec? Should we just give up on specifying send transaction? I don't really like that. Should we have it as a kind of optional thing with maybe this like profile thing where we say as a wallet you want to implement it, but as someone else you don't want to implement it? And like this, all of these things are basically a bit unclear right now. But I do think that with fill transaction, it's just a matter of implementing it. Like you can implement it in the client, no problem. And if you have the feature and you know some advertisement happens for this feature, then it will also be used.
Okay, I'm going to treat this as to be continued. It sounds like we have more discussion to do, and the answer might just be something simple as push an EIP in the interface category, and in bold print at the top says, we intend to deprecate X with this new RPC Y, right? And it's just a thing that we talk about, and then it's part of driving consensus from the RPC providers, from our audience, from our users, et cetera, in the broader context of introducing the EIP, but it does not force or delay implementation of, you know, for instance, ETH fill transaction as we wait for ETH send transaction to be deprecated. I like that. It's more of a just process improvement than trying to build a new process. Cool. All right, we got 4 minutes left. One thing I wanted to ask real quick, I mean, we use all the time, but sure, this is, you know, one of our earlier calls. I was going to propose, should this be a half-hour call as opposed to an hour call? But I don't know, an hour kind of feels right at the moment. Is anybody upset with how long this meeting was? It felt pretty content dense to me.
I mean, it's interesting, but we do need to get more people into this meeting. So I think that's the thing. You just need to, I mean, this is something that we need to figure out how to reach other people. You said it before, and then it can totally be an hour, but we have to hear it from other people as well, like what they are doing.
No changes for now, then. All right, cool. I think that's a good stopping point, but 3 minutes if anybody wants to take the floor. All right. Rad. I'm going to post my own notes as well as a list of action items in the RPC Discord on ETH-R&D. And this was recorded. It'll probably find its way onto YouTube. And historically, AI-generated summaries of meetings have also been posted as well. So be on the lookout for those if you need them. Cool. Thanks, everyone. See you again in 2 weeks or on the ETH-R&D RPC Discord channel.